Okay, it says it's recording.
Yeah.
I just don't trust those three little dots after it, as if it's gonna,
I don't trust
if it's still thinking, you know. Oh well, we'll do it. Okay. So welcome everyone to another conversation on transition. The lovely guest that we have today is Suzanne Waldron, who is both a dear friend of mine, but also an amazing human doing amazing things in the world. So it was only a matter of time before she was going to appear. And yeah, we were talking about Suzanne's new book. So to give everyone a bit of a background, Suzanne is a behavioural facilitator who helps people and teams do wonderful things and be wonderful with each other. You probably describe it differently, but that's what came to my mind then.
the heart.
Exactly. And she is a curator, including a TEDx Perth, and an artist, but also really a humanitarian as well, like, you know, someone who definitely embodies compassion and care for others more than, you know, anyone else I can think of. So yeah. So that's
ready.
So this is really the conversation we're going to have today, which is sort of interesting in the context of conversations on transition, because we often talk about the role of localism, like in a lot of the conversations I've had so far, that getting back to the local and place-based and local-based economies is a big focus of conversations on transition. However, of course, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and there's a role for the connection to the global as well. And so that's where we're going today. Suzanne, towards the end of last year, ended up going to Africa and visiting probably one of the largest slums in the world. How many? 4 million people, did you say?
There was, yeah. So there were millions of people in that area, and 200,000 in my immediate area. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, I'll let you tell some of the story, but long story short, what she experienced and witnessed there led to, well, part of the inspiration for the writing of this book, but definitely a lot of the inspiration for what's happening with the book now. And I promise I'll let you talk very soon, Suzanne, but I wanted to, I really wanted to set the tone for the conversation with a excerpt from your book, because I think the poetry and words in there sort of speak for themselves.
Oh, thank
you. So the section that I'm going to read is called Kindness, which is very appropriate for today. So kindness is profound regard for all things, showing both gratitude and compassion, reminding us that others suffer. Kindness seeks no return, only to fill another's cup. Kindness is listening with every cell of our body. It is not distracted or inattentive. Kindness is integrity, considerate, careful, caring, human.
Wow.
Lovely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful collection of deep thoughts, philosophies, really an invitation for people to feel more deeply in its poeticness, and of course beautiful artwork by another dear friend of ours, Natalia Fadica.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I might hand it over to you, and you can sort of maybe give a bit of an intro to what it was like for you over there, and what it's inspired in you now.
Thank you, and thanks for asking to have this conversation. And I'm really keen for people who watch this in retrospect or join to converse. This is, it's important, I think, for us. I'm actually looking for answers. I'm going to tell you some stuff, but I'm actually looking for answers from our community, or at least thoughts or suggestions, because I went to Kenya to experience something that was polar opposite to the life that I live now. I had a very difficult childhood, very traumatic and violent childhood, and have been able to live a really blessed, privileged, and resourceful and educated life now in my 40s. And I was thinking to myself, I live in Perth, we have everything we need. It's, completely abundant, and I wanted to understand what it was like to be in the absolute opposite, even though I felt like I'd had opposite experiences as a child. but nothing could prepare me for what it was like to live in a slum and in an orphanage. And when I arrived and stayed there, it was the first time I think I actually realised what a government was for, in the face of complete abandonment of a government. So, you know, sitting in front of someone who has 15 children or mouths to feed, and if you can imagine, like the size of two smaller bedrooms that everybody lives in you know, mud rooms with a mud floor, and all they had to eat or drink was a bowl of water that was from the river. And as I stood in front of this lady in particular, with all of her children, she was facing having to sell children or herself to get rice or to get water to be able to survive another day. And, you know, like my problem solving hat was on. I was standing there and I'm thinking, you know, like, how can she make money, or how can she be resourceful? But when there's no water to be bought and there's no food to be bought and nothing to buy it with, and even if you had seeds to plant to grow something, you wouldn't water them, you would drink the water. And then the fact that the cultural aspects of it that is very different between men and women, and the fact that there are dowries for marriage and women are generally objectified and owned to some degree. It's not always like that, but it was the first time I ever found myself not being able to come up with a solution other than you literally just have to hope that someone or something will happen, survive. And it confronted me no end, because there's no services from the government, and all they have is how they can share with one another to help survive. And so what this elicited, or I suppose brought out in my mind, is why can one country in the world be allowed to live like that versus another country like ours is not allowed to live like that. And I started to think about what systems are in place and what are the inefficiencies and the ineffectiveness of systems that allow corruption and greed and a lot of different types of activities or non-activity that really sort of support the attainment and competition and profit mongering to be more important than the lives of millions of people in your own country. And then why isn't there a global government that can oversee standards like this? And then COVID hit, and then I'm like, it's even worse for people in that situation now. And then I start to think, just a small thought, you know, nothing much going on in my brain here at all. But then I start to think, you know, like, we've got really good at supporting local and helping local and really connecting into our communities, and it divides us and further brings us away from people in need that we can't see. So I'm starting to ask questions. How can we build compassion within ourselves for ourselves, with the people around us, without forgetting people who we can't see, haven't got a voice, and haven't got any resources to get any of that either. And, you know, it's very easy for me to go out and show pictures of children who are starving and whatnot, but you weren't there. You didn't touch that kid. You didn't tell stories with that child. You didn't pick that baby up that was scratching itself to death practically because it had such disease. You didn't give a bread roll to a kid who hadn't eaten for 2 weeks. So it doesn't, like, it means a lot to me because I was there, but people who weren't there, I understand. Like, I'm not going to be as connected to a cause that you are because I didn't go there. So my point here is, how can we build compassion that's relevant to us all, that still actually helps other people, even though we haven't met them? And so the book now, all of the proceeds of the book, 100% of the profit goes to that orphanage, and I'd like to raise $500,000 as quickly as I can, sell 40,000 books, to raise compassion. It's not about raising money, it's about raising compassion for people who can't see, who may be forgotten.
And it's a very important, like, really important question, because as much as we can definitely see, you know, lots of evidence of community coming together to look after each other, like our local community. But the isolation and the, you know, crisis situation definitely does mean that, you know, we do become more insular, which, you know, is not necessarily a bad thing. Like it's difficult to be able to help others if we don't feel that we have, you know, what we need to feel secure. But of course that doesn't help very much for, you know, people in situations where there really is not many others helping them.
It can help them, yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is for us to discuss is, how do we build compassion and how do we raise our connection to the local tribe, nation and nature of the community? Because I was interviewing Shani Graham for TEDx Perth, and she said community or geographical community is people that you can walk to.
Yeah.
And so that's going to probably include around about 100 people in your like close network. And so how do we raise compassion to continue for us to really support and provide with one another, and allow ourselves to give over resources and time and or money and or clothes or whatever it might be for people that we don't know. And so we have a local connection but a global perspective. And I from because I'm, you know, a behavioural change person, so I understand that we keep things close. It's a tribal and primal nature for us to be able to protect the people around us. But the reality is we are in a global economy, and we do know that those people are suffering, and we can do something about it.
Yeah, it's reminding me of integral theory or spiral dynamics, which is closely related. And the like I'm very allergic to that term, raising consciousness. But what I do like about those theories is how they help show how our consciousness is able to expand to include larger and larger spheres, and kind of, you know, traces through history how this is developing. And there's a movement from egocentric consciousness to family-centric consciousness to group-centric consciousness. But really, you know, the call now in this globally connected and really dependent world, because the major challenges and crises that we face are global, that the call now is to move to a global centric consciousness, which, you know, in those kind of theories, they explain the differences in values and that kind of thing.
It's important to recognize the difference between globalization, which is let's make everything faster and cheaper, as opposed to a global centric vision, which is taking care of everyone and the network to everyone. It's very two different things.
Definitely.
That's what I think is interesting, is like having that local perspective with the global consciousness. You know?
Yeah, for sure. And it was big, tough challenges to face in that, because a lot of the places that aren't so well off, you know, a lot of their income comes from either exporting stuff to us that really, you know, is exceedingly cheap for us to buy. And so to a certain extent, we're including externalities on the social and environmental levels that occur in those countries, not for us. And yet that also is a source of income that they've now come to depend on.
Yeah.
So there's always challenges in terms of like suddenly shifting a kind of relationship in that way, because we like to think that it's not okay anymore. However, if that's all they have, it needs to be done very carefully. So there's many challenges, but you can really, it was making me think of how like the conversations that we've been having about localization and local economies, you know, that really is about community building, and it's about, you know, slowing down, and it's about finding more meaning, but it also is about building a more resilient economy with the capacity to care for people and for place. But, you know, it's sort of making, you know, seeing how that can co-arise around the world, where even the less fortunate communities get the opportunity to be building their local resilience and economies and communities in conjunction with other communities all across the world. So how does a network, how do we support each other globally in building the local?
Absolutely. And this is where I think I was working with someone the other day, and you're reminding me of this thing where, you know, they were like, our next KPI is to grow to this point, and then we want to get this many, we want this many staff in our business, and then we want, you know, and it was just grow. And I was sitting in there thinking, to what end? Like, so that you feel like you could win? Is it so that you could feel like you could have more or be the best? Or and I think to myself, we could transfer some of that capitalist type extreme thinking of the winning and getting the most and extracting and attaining, that competitive perspective that we seem to have particularly in a business world, and that commerce is so important. If we can transfer some of that thinking and that passion into to actually sharing and to dividing resources, and not needing to have the status and the power and that connection to more, then we'd start actually changing the mentality of even being in local, so that we can have enough to provide for everyone. And I know I'm not the first person to think these things. You know?
Yeah, of course.
It's something that's been happening for a very, very long time. But it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be thought about just because it hasn't been solved yet, you know?
Yes.
And I think this is a really good opportunity and window for us to be able to, like, truly have conversations with one another about reducing this need to protect and to consume, and increase our compassion and increase our connection to. I actually think starting with localization is really important, because you build the muscle for compassion for others that you can
Definitely.
see.
Definitely.
You can extend that past people you can't see into worlds and places you've never been.
Yeah, because I think the thing with compassion is it's not. I think sometimes there's a concern that if we care about too many things, then we get burnt out, which can be true. But compassion in itself only breeds more compassion, which is sometimes, which there is that double-edged sword with compassion, is that can lead to feeling like we need to be solving everything, that we need to be doing everything. But if we are able to maintain sort of self-awareness in how we do that, it doesn't necessarily need to lead to burnout. And it's when we can feel like there's others doing it with us, then we don't have to take the whole burden ourselves.
Natalia said once, the author of I'm the author, hang on, the artist. I do remember writing the book. She once told me, you know, that someone else said to her, this is a good pass on bit of information, but that to remember that you've got your part of the jigsaw puzzle and other people have got their parts of the jigsaw puzzle, and then to just trust that everyone is working on their part of the jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
But I think that helps you to calm down into your own, you know, influence. And you've spoken with Mike House heaps, and he talks heaps about the sphere of control and influence, and knowing what you can control and what you can influence. And I think, you know, we all have to keep coming back to what, you know, what's real about what we can contribute to. But if we can raise, and this is what this book is for, is to help people to wake up. It's called Sleeping Giants. It's about waking up that giant inside of you, to be apathetic or to be passive in life, and to really stand into the place. I don't care what people's standards are, as long as they have some. And I mean that as in, like, criteria to life. Like, how do you want your life to be? If you want a white picket fence and 2 kids and a dog, like, do it, but do it on purpose. If you want to be crazy free spirits, like people that we know who, you know, when we can, roam around the world and do all these amazing things in nature, you know, the things that Claire likes to do, that's great. Are you doing it on purpose? Do we know why it's happening? And so waking up that giant helps us to be able to see each other rather than in this blind spot that we allow ourselves to be consumed and to be used for agendas that are to do with power and greed, not to do with community and compassion. And so, you know, I don't know how, and this is some of the stuff I want to ask the community, is I don't know how to help people to see what I've seen without them having had the first-hand experience, because I know that if everyone that was there with me saw what I saw, felt what I felt, and touched who I touched, everyone would want to do what I'm doing. And so but I completely understand that why you wouldn't if you weren't there. So being able to tap into something that's relevant to each person as we build compassion, that's what's in it for me here. I'd really like to understand how we can help reach systems and interrupt systems, to fix systems, leaving people completely and utterly abandoned.
Well, it's interesting you say systems, because, you know, even we see like what you're trying to do with the book in terms of the raising of the money, like, you know, I think these days people get a bit, you know, there's so many charities, there's so many causes that the idea, well, I'm raising money for, sometimes isn't seen as like good enough. Like you need to have built this whole, you know, thing around it. But, you know, really in this case, like you would have seen firsthand that, you know, all of those dollars go directly to literally saving lives, you know, stopping someone from the brink of starving to death.
Yeah.
You know, so there's no like, oh, is it is it going to be effective? Is the, you know, the money going to admin or?
Well, this is why I chose this place to go, because Suzanne Saliba, who is the founder, lives in WA, and I spoke at her lunch fundraiser a couple of years ago, and basically I know because I was there, all the money that was donated went to the bank account, but I drew out the cash and went and spent it. Like it's so directly 100% given. If you gave me $20, I would get that $20 out in Kenya and I'd go and spend it.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a charity that's done that.
So direct. Yeah.
And so that's where I can get that comfort. But then, you know, in some ways I think to myself, well, then I'm only helping a few hundred people, and this is a really freaking big problem. So I love being on the ground and being able to directly help those people that I personally have actually held hands with. But I'm more interested, I don't know if more interested, but equally interested in like understanding why the systems are broken so badly that even we shouldn't have to depend on you and I to prop up government systems that are broken.
Exactly. And I think we were having this conversation in the lead up to scheduling this session, was it's very difficult to do the systems work with any form of efficacy if you also haven't done the direct on the ground one-to-one stuff, which might only be seen as patching up the symptoms or the externalities of the system which exists. But in my mind, it's very difficult to stand with full awareness or integrity in either one of those spaces if you haven't at least had some experience in the other. Which is where, you know, sometimes I meet people, you know, who really want to, oh, the problems are so big, I don't know where to start. But sometimes just getting in and doing something helps open your mind to all those things that even though you might feel like you're doing something quite simple, you can then see all the connections and causes and spillover effects.
And that's the thing, like I could never have understood, like when I stood in front of this lady, I could never have understood that without, you know, and this woman the other day, she said to me when we were having a conversation, she said, why don't they just stop reproducing? And I thought, whoa, I was like, whoa, first of all, I was like, what kind of question is that? And then I was like, I can understand why you think that as a question, because there's a lack of understanding of the cultural norms, the cultural expectations, the religious views, but also our right to reproduce and our right to, you know, and so,
well, and our right to have a desire to have a family, you know.
Reproduce, exactly right. And so it's such an interesting thing, and I don't know, maybe I would have thought that at some point as well in my life, but having stood there and seen the absolute lack of opportunity, like a genuine lack of opportunity and a lack of the basic fundamental needs, no way of getting them, and in any way, the form that you and I would be able to just problem solve our way right out of that by applying a bit of effort and will. I wouldn't be able to have this conversation like this.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing I think I'm looking to work on, is how to engage people as best we can to build compassion, knowing that they haven't necessarily had these experiences and might not be able to in the near future due to the environmental circumstances.
Well, can I ask you, because I know you do a lot of work with stories, you know, being a speaker and all the other things that you do. So, you know, when you're sort of posing that question of what can we do in order to invoke compassion, you know, the obvious answer that jumps into my mind is the sharing of stories, which of course is what you're doing now. But I wonder if you have any reflections on, in your work using stories in various contexts, what have you seen in terms of its ability to help inspire and you know, just invoke all forms of connection and feeling for others through the use of stories? And then maybe also, where do you see the limitations in just a storytelling approach?
Yeah, these are good questions. I've been doing a lot of work on stories lately, for lots of different reasons, of writing a book, but also curating. And I was working with a client the other day about, they were like, we want to be able to tell stories better as an organization. And I said, that's beautiful, but first of all, you've got to know what you want to say, why you mean it, and why it's important. Like, so storytelling part is actually the least important part that I want to talk to you about right now. I actually want to talk about, do you know what you want to say? And know why you mean it? Because then storytelling itself is just an avenue of communication, just as telling a metaphor or explaining a case study or playing a piece of music or whatever it might be is a communication method. And stories, I think, are beautiful ways for us to find a way to relate and to connect and then translate our own version of our story to be able to liken something. And so I find storytelling really useful. And I suppose a limitation in it is that you could get it's like a quick fix of dopamine, and you can really feel it, but doesn't mean you can do anything about it.
Yeah.
So you get the feels. It's like the difference between inspiration and motivation. You can be inspired for something, it doesn't mean you can do anything with it, which is motivation. And so that could be the limit to that. Like, people could feel it for a moment, but yeah. And also when like Black Lives Matter happened, and is continuing to happen, obviously, but when it first occurred this time around, people were talking about slacktivism. You know, if you put the black square up, for example, on Instagram, it makes you feel like you've done something or contributed something, and it makes you feel good in the moment, in the sense that you are in unity and camaraderie. But what have you actually done? And so slacktivism rather than activism is another thing. So these short things sometimes can be detrimental, because it's almost like a trick that you've felt something, so therefore you feel like you've been included in something and you've done something, but you actually haven't. I think that can be a limit sometimes when you invoke emotions like that.
I guess when I think about like what examples come to mind where it is very effective, it's sort of like someone already has done the background work to set up the mechanism where that person's desire then for action can be like engaged in a meaningful way. You know, like who gives a crap toilet paper, for example. You know, they're quite clear on, you know, communicating the problems that they're trying to assist with in terms of, you know, people who live without access to toilets. Then obviously providing people immediately an avenue with which to do something about that, going, oh, make the choice to buy our toilet paper over someone else's. Like, you know, it's super simple, very clear on where the profits are going. And you know, you do feel like, man, that would be really bad to not have running water or a toilet. So it's making me think of the role of like the network and the people in coming together to work out what would be an effective avenue, and then connecting that with the storytelling.
Well, I've done a bit of work. I want to use the force and like pull the paper that's all the way over the other side of the room, having to get up and go and get it, because I don't want to leave the screen. But basically, there's 3 circles on there that I've been working on, which is basically to look at what would this project look like when it succeeds? What is the authentic and organic voice that I can help it have? And how will it restore both not only my own sense of self, but also this restoration of community? And so when I'm looking at these 3 circles, I'm looking at, what would be in it for someone to partner with me, or for an organization to want to build and make. I was talking to Jimmy Murphy earlier, and he said, well, WA is better when it's giving. WA is better when it's generous. And I was just like, oh my God, like what organization could be around here that would want to help a founder of an organization like Nakuru Hope, that was born from WA, that helps something globally, but it makes us better because we are in compassion and generosity and working in a way that supports more than just us. And so I'm starting to do the thinking around what value would that be for a socially responsible, ethical, international organization that would want to wake up the sleeping giant in people, but know that it's going to have this profound effect on not only who we are being locally, but who we are being globally as an individual or a community. I just do that work, so do that thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
The cat. I haven't seen her all day, and now she's like, the camera's on, Mama. I want to watch.
Bless. Yes, and it was making me think about, in terms of global issues, like a refugee crisis, for example, or climate refugees, where one of the, potential so-called solutions is to close the borders, don't let them in. But really, when you try to tackle the more root causes in terms of like lack of food security, or in some places even like decimation of just where those people live, the role of giving becomes more than just because we are better humans when we're giving, but actually because that's what it takes in order to stem the tide of some of these really impending catastrophic risks that we face. So rather than what do we do with refugees, how do we create the conditions in which those people don't have to become refugees to begin with?
I'm just going to quickly minimize my screen here so I can read this quote to you that I thought was beautiful. And it says, it's by, is it Muna Abdi? Instead of praising people for being resilient, change the systems that are making them vulnerable.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, let's work on those systems. Good Sunday afternoon chats.
Yeah. Go somewhere else. So let's talk. So what you're doing with the book now. So the book's only just come out, and all proceeds from all the sales of the books will go directly to Nakuru Hope. But you have a fundraising goal now. You've set yourself the target of raising $500,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't say it like that. $500,000 seems so much more achievable than $500,000.
It's all achievable. It's all achievable. So I suppose, are you also looking for people's ideas and inputs as to what could boost the fundraiser?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like partners.
Yeah, particularly West Australian organisations who have that lens of building resourcefulness and compassion in our community, but understands that global reach and global compassion is equally important. And so this isn't about, it's not actually about me, and it's not actually about those kids. That's the impact is on those kids, but I want the broader impact to be about this book reaching people so that they can build that internal compassion, so that we can support one another much more readily close by, but also see, and as I said before, not to forget people who we can't see as well. And so I'm particularly at the moment looking for organisations who would want to go hand in hand with a brand and a cause that's about compassion building in our community, and helping to get more leverage and coverage that we can get that book out into more hands in our country.
Yeah. Nice.
So if anyone would like to help me with that, I would love that. Please build my circles on my piece of paper about how to do that.
Lovely. Well, there's the challenge for anyone listening out there. And I'm sure we'll be following closely to see how it carries on.
Yeah, thank you so much for paying attention and for being willing to talk about it, and for supporting through this conversation as well. Really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. And you're doing such amazing work that it deserves all the conversations.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, I'm sure we'll see you again on Conversations on Transition. I have no doubt.
I'm sure I will. I've got plenty of things to talk about.
Yes, you do. Oh, that sounded bad, but in a good way, in a really interesting way.
Love it.
Okay, I'll stop talking now.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Oh.